Sorry, folks, we need to just change the camera.
Hey everyone, welcome. We are so delighted that you're here this morning. I'm Judy Cochran-Pratt, and it has been my honor to serve as the co-president of the ERA Alliance. Along the way, my co-president, Lori Bunton. Hey Lori, woo! And Terry Wally have threatened me. They have thrown me downstairs. Terry so badly wanted to be the only president that she reported me missing during Hurricane Helen. And but I caught up with the Red Cross and said, I'm okay. But I'm just so happy to see this wonderful crowd today. Thank you for coming. I saw this quote recently: "No man is bad enough and no woman good enough to be the president of the United States." Wow. No man is bad enough and no woman good enough to be the president of the United States. As the recent presidential, think about that. As the recent presidential election has proven, as long as women are considered second-class citizens, a woman will never be president. We are not willing to give up our equality. Thank you for being with us today. This is a gathering of strong women and organizations fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment. Let's all remember, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The ERA has met all the requirements of Article 5 of the United States Constitution. Thus, it is the 28th Amendment, only needing to be published by the National Archives with or without the order from the President of the United States. Michelle will tell you more about this in her presentation. As co-presidents of the Alliance, Terry Wally and I are the first to say that our leadership has not resulted in the publication of the ERA or the North Carolina General Assembly adding the ERA to the state constitution, but we have made significant headway. Here's Terry Wally, my outstanding and brilliant co-president, to report on the Alliance's accomplishments this year. Terry?
All right. One of the things is I do want to make sure that we acknowledge our board that's here. Everybody, if you're on the board, please stand up. If you're an officer, please stand up. Judy is our vice president of PR. Marla is our chief of fundraising. Jan is our secretary. Robbie's on the board. Pat's on the board. And then Audrey, who has now vanished, is our treasurer. So, Sherry managed to stay seated, but she's our vice president. She is very key this year. So, we've got the landing. All right. Okay, so Virginia's going to do our landing acknowledgement. The ERA-NC Alliance respectfully acknowledges that the lands throughout our state are the traditional homelands and gathering places of many indigenous peoples. This land we stand on today once belonged to indigenous people from the tribes of Swara, Kiowa, Eno, and Sissepahaw, before their land was stolen and they experienced forced removal by colonizers. I invite you to hear these words. O Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the winds, hear me. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me walk in beauty and make my eyes ever hold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things you have made and my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise so that I may understand the things that you have taught my people. Let me learn the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Help me remain calm and strong in the face of all that comes towards me. Help me find compassion without empathy overwhelming me. I seek strength not to be greater than my brother, but to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me always ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so that when life fades, as the fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame. That was translated by Lakota Sioux Chief Yellow Lark in 1887. We share an ongoing responsibility to safeguard these lands and to respect the sovereignty of the tribes and indigenous nations residing in North Carolina. The ERA-NC Alliance works to hold equal all indigenous peoples who have been and continue to be an integral part of our history and our culture.
I may have jumped the gun, and we've already done our dignitaries, and I do also want to point out that we do have an elected official here, Pat Sloan. She's our board member, and she is an alderman for the town of Spencer. And, that's every hat on her head possible. You can jump in real quick.
We have one of our ERA champions.
Thank you very much. All right, and then also want to make sure that we recognize our lead boards. We've got, you know that we have a tremendous number of organizations that help us all along the way. American Association of University Women of North Carolina, the ACLU, the Democratic Women of North Carolina, the League of Women Voters of North Carolina, North Carolina Association of Women Attorneys, North Carolina Business and Professional Women, NC Justice Center, National Court of Organization for Women, Women's Forum of Tennessee, and Women's. So let's give a round of applause. They give us a lot of money and a lot of time, so we really appreciate that. All right, so when I started thinking about what all the things that we've done this year, I went back and looked at last year's annual meeting to see, okay, what is it that we said we were going to do? And last December, and honestly, I think we can pat ourselves on the back because we really achieved a lot of what we set out to do. When Jeannie and I took office in 2023, we were both very frustrated about the federal Equal Rights Amendment. And as I've said many times, the federal ERA is like the plane circling LaGuardia that just never comes in for a landing. So we've had steps forward in 2024 on the national front, and you're going to hear a lot about them today. Michelle Thorne is going to tell us about the American Bar Association's resolution and what that's going to mean for the future of the ERA. On the federal level, the U.S. House established an ERA caucus, which is a great thing. And both the House and the Senate have resolutions in their chambers pending that would both remove the 1982 time limit and declare the ERA as the 28th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So, and we have done, as an alliance, we have done all of our part on the federal level too. We have persuaded all of our pro-women members of our congressional delegation to sign on to all those House bills. You know, we don't have anyone in the Senate, unfortunately. And then we also have Congresswoman Alma Adams and Valerie Foushee, who longtime ERA champions, are both in the ERA caucus in the U.S. House. So that's been a tremendous thing for us. We really are grateful to all of our congressmen because they really listen to us when we ask them to do something. We're going to be a lot more limited in 2025 on the federal level because we're going to only have 4 pro-ERA members in Congress. We also continue to demand that President Joe Biden order the archivists to publish the ERA. We write postcards, we make phone calls, and we use our connections to urge him to publish. In July, we published an open letter in North Carolina's 3 major newspapers asking him to publish. And at that time, you recall, he was still the presidential candidate, and he was spending a lot of time in North Carolina. So we think he saw that. You know, we have also asked Roy Cooper, we called Roy Cooper and asked him to speak to Kamala. We know they're personal friends. We've done a lot of that kind of connectedness. But as we grew frustrated with our federal efforts, we turned our alliance's focus to North Carolina. If we can't get equal legal rights for all American women, can we bring them to the women of North Carolina? And our mission, our #1 mission at the Alliance is to get the federal ERA ratified here in North Carolina. And even though 38 states have already ratified, it is still important for us to ratify. Not only is ratification symbolic, it's a deep expression of how the leaders of the state view more than 5 million of its citizens. But it also may bolster our standing in the courts later, just in case a state that's already ratified tries to back out. Now, I know that that's never happened in the U.S. history of the Constitution. We are sailing in different waters. We are not where we've been before. Our second goal is to get an ERA in our state constitution. And Nevada did that 2 years ago, and New York just did that 2 weeks ago. So we have seen, especially in Pennsylvania, we have seen state ERAs used as effective tools for women's rights broadly, and then also for reproductive rights. Pennsylvania was very successful in using their state ERA to to fight back against the anti-abortion. Excuse me.
I hate to interrupt, but will you be able to send what you're saying right now to us afterwards? Because I'm trying to write some things down and I don't want to miss anything.
Sure, I would be glad to.
Okay, that would be really helpful.
Maybe I should write a memoir and just have it.
Yeah, well, don't make that long. Just send this weekend.
Okay, so anyway, we realized that we could not get a state ERA, and we're not gonna get a ratification with the anti-woman supermajority in our NCGA. So we said, great, well, let's flip the NCGA. How hard can that be? How hard can that be? You know, gerrymandered districts, they're not gonna stop us. So we started out this year in February, we heard from the prominent political scientist, Michael Bitzer. And he laid out the exact nature of how people vote in the state and their districts in North Carolina. And he showed us that even with just a small number of volunteers and limited funds, that we really could make a difference if we were strategic. So that's what we did. So in March, we asked Lillian's List to teach us exactly how to get out the vote. What do you do? And what works? And we found out a lot, you know, basically knocking on doors, making those phone calls, writing notes, those things work. So, and I'd like to take a second to say thank you, they're not here, but to Michael Bitzer and to Sarah President Williams for all the time and effort that they spend with us, both for their presentations and beyond, because anytime we've had a question, we just call them and they answer. So our Vice President of Legislative, Sherry McQueen, and our Vice President of PR, Judy Lewis, are going to give you a lot more detail about their fantastic GOTV campaign that they did. But for the moment, I'm just going to give you a couple of the highlights. Our GOTV task force, which is led by Sherry, Judy, and Elena Ogle, who's not here today, they started out by surveying every single candidate for the State House, the State Senate, and for the U.S. House candidates from North Carolina, to find out which candidates could be named an ERA champion. And y'all, that is a monumental job. That is a lot of people, that's a lot of addresses to track them down. They worked really, really hard. And Robbie has done this every 2 years since that the founding. Yes. So we took their answers and we posted them to our website so that voters could see for themselves who is a pro-ERA candidate. We do not endorse, that's very clear, we do not endorse candidates, but you can be a champion, and that means that you support our issue, which is the Equal Rights Amendment. So in one race, we had a Republican and a Democrat who were both champions. And, you know, the more pro-ERA person won that race. And then, as you'll see from Sherry and Judy, we honed in on 4 races, 3 in the State House and then 1 in the State Senate. And the upshot is, we did it. We broke the NCGA super majority. So our pro-ERA legislators that won were Lindsey Prather in Buncombe County and Lisa Grafstein in Wade County. We still have our fingers crossed in the Nicole Sid and Tricia Cotton race in Mecklenburg County. We're waiting. I think Nicole's going to ask for a recount. But think about this: they gerrymandered that district just so Tricia Cotton would win. And Nicole Sidney is still only like 150 votes behind her. That's incredible. That is incredible. And I give the credit to the GOTV. BT. Okay, and then we've also been successful in our Council of State this year because we have a great roster of longtime ERA champions. We've got Josh Stein as governor, we've got Rachel Hunt as lieutenant governor, we've got Jeff Jackson as attorney general, and we've got Elaine Marshall as secretary of state. Rachel, Jeff, and Elaine in particular have always been longtime champions when they were in the State House and Senate. And I really feel strongly that all of this year's hard work has laid the groundwork for both ratification and a future state amendment. And so while we have also worked hard on the GOTV, we have also been working to expand our base of leaders to help us build momentum for a state ERA. And so this year we welcomed the North Carolina Justice Center on board, and you will remember earlier this year they did excellent research on the State of Working Women report that they put out, and where North Carolina women came in dead last by every measure, every single measure. And so I do want to take a special moment to call out some of our leaders today who helped us this year. North Carolina Now in June for what we're calling the infamous Dobbs Day. We worked with NC Now to create a Make the Call Joe rally on the lawn at the Capitol, urging President Biden to publish the ERA. For Women's Equality Day in August, the League of Women Voters U.S. reaffirmed its commitment to the ERA and called on Biden to publish, as well as to have Congress pass the resolutions. And I also want to thank Kate Stadelman, who's with the Mecklenburg County League, because she worked very, very hard on her GOTV efforts. And particularly thank the North Carolina Association of Women Attorneys, especially Audrey Snyder, for her tireless work on the statutes task force, and Judge Linda McGee for all her guidance. And on top of that, Debbie Davis, I want to thank her too. She is the owner of a yarn dye shop in Charlotte, and she reissued her Equal Rights for All Y'all yarn and sold it at a festival with thousands of people and she sold it on International Women's Day. So that was a really great thing. Everybody got a button and yarn. And then I also want to welcome our newest member organization, which is the ERA Club of Carver High School. They already have 95. Isn't that incredible? So they couldn't be here today, but they are really interested in donning this feminist mantle and keeping the ERA movement going. They are also looking to set up a second club at Chapel Hill High School. So that is great news indeed for the forward momentum of this. So our driving goal from now until inauguration day is just one thing, and that is getting Joe Biden to publish. He has the power to do it. He has support from Congress and from legal scholars. And I strongly feel that by making 52% of this nation first-class citizens, he would leave a legacy to rival Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he would. It's right up there with the Emancipation Proclamation. So we want to ask you to do what you can, whether that's write a postcard or make a phone call, and most importantly, think about your connections. I think that's one of the ways it's going to happen. Is whoever can whisper in his ear and say, "Hush." So let's think of this instead of 3 degrees from Kevin Bacon. Let's think of 3 degrees from President Biden. Who do you know? They know who they know, and it's a lot of people. I mean, you really know more people than you think. So, and the right person to talk to Biden is going to be the saving grace for you. So, thank you. The other thing that we did do this year is you'll recall that a few years ago, Winston and Strawn went through all of our statutes, our pro bono for Winston and Strawn, and that is 45,000 pages of statutes. They had thousands of hours, 85 lawyers poring over the statutes, and they did it for us for free. Pro bono, incredible. So they handed that over to us, and we took it. And the first thing that happened, of course, is I charge off and I say, "Hey, North Carolina government, I've got 20,000 changes for y'all. Here, take it, cut and paste." And they just laughed and laughed. So this year we said, "Okay, that's not gonna work." So we went back and we said, "How about 8?" And we have found an awesome commission, that works within the state government. It's called the North Carolina General Statutes Commission. You don't go to them if you want a radical change, but if you want a small change in a statute, that's where you go. So we got quite a few of them. We were very, very happy. As you can see, we came up with our 8, and we 3 of them were amended, 3 of them were repealed. The laws were repealed. We got 3 laws repealed in the state of North Carolina. That's incredible. One of them we dropped, and one of them the commission dropped. So I'm going to read you this report from Ann Von Brock. She was my co-chair of the Statutes Commission, and she's not able to be here today, so she handed me this report too. For the past 14 months, a General Statutes Task Force of the Alliance has been working on the North Carolina laws that unnecessarily discriminate. With the immeasurable help of Audrey Snyder, we focused on the General Statutes Commission appointed by the North Carolina General Assembly and consisting of faculty from each law school in North Carolina, as well as 1 representative and 1 senator from the General Assembly. Initially, we presented the commission with the full report, then they asked us to come back, and then we narrowed it down to 9. And as you can see, 4 statutes amended, 3 repealed, and 1 was dropped by us, and 1 was dropped by the commission. Some of the changes included just repealing obsolete things, like whether you, indigent mother could get her own kid out of an orphanage. I mean, this is what we're talking about. And sometimes you think it doesn't really matter until you think about how Arizona has pulled out a 150-year-old law to push abortion issues. And if it's on the books, it's still on the books, and you can still use it. And then we did another thing, and at the request of the commission, we did identify 7 more statutes that use the antiquated terms femme covert or coverture, which basically refers to a woman who was married. It means that a married woman is no longer considered a separate individual, right? You become part of your husband, which I don't like that. No, I don't think anybody here wants that to happen. So the commission agreed to recommend deleting all those terms, and then where it was appropriate, they just replaced it with the word marriage. And that's in keeping with the current marriage laws. And these were all included in their technical corrections bills. So that is, 7 out of those 7 were corrected by the commission. Then the Alliance Task Force brought another 41 statutes, which listed protected classes and referred to either sex and or gender. There's a lot of inconsistency in the laws. Our recommendation was to replace them all with sex, gender, because sex, gender, race, color, all these different categories. And then because of the wide variance on every one of the statutes, whether it was employment or elections or insurance or education, they decided that was too broad, and that they would have to consider all those statutes individually. So in May, they submitted the bill, House Bill 917, to the State House, and their introductory paragraph included the words, "There is no known opposition to this bill." The House did pass it, but it is currently sitting in the Senate, and nothing is happening. So our friend at the commission said that he expects they will just refile the same bill in the new session, and then hopefully we'll go forward. The one statute that we were unhappy about was the one about health hospitals, and that there should be no discrimination in healthcare facilities. And we wanted to add the word sex or gender, either one, and we got a hard no. And I think that they saw what we saw, which was that would open the door to unlimited reproductive access. So we were very disappointed that what we told them we weren't going anywhere, and we were coming back, and so. Statute commission too. And also I wanted to thank our champion, Julie Monhaven. She wrote a letter and had a lot of Democrats sign it, saying that they really support this work in the commission. It did kick up a little backlash because the Republican the Senate House member said, well, it looks like this is only signed by Democrats. And I said, well, you said you were gonna go talk to your caucus and see what they had to say, and I assumed you meant your Republican caucus, so I thought we needed to know what the Democrats thought too, and he didn't say anything else after that, so. But I do appreciate them going to all that trouble to have that signed. And then, one of the things that we did want you to know, across this entire bill, we did not even ask for this, but, the commission also made, in 21 different places in this bill, they fixed the pronouns. And they fixed the pronoun issue, and so that was not even something we asked for. So I really feel hopeful that going forward, you know, that the bill writers are gonna be cognizant of gender in the statutes and make them gender neutral, as much as they can, so.
They fix the pronouns too. How do they?
So in some of them, they went for he or she, and I think, you know, sometimes you just becomes firefighters instead of fireman, you know, police officers, that sort of thing too. So they fixed that to make it gender neutral. They did not use they, I don't think, as a substitute for he or she. So, because that is a trend, that is there, yeah. So, okay, and so that is the, that's the general statutes. Does anyone have any questions? I would be happy to answer any questions. Sure.
Since I'm involved with town laws, what was the one with towns? It was 160A, it was on the slide previous. Chapter 160A, cities and towns. If I can look that one up.
160. The council may provide for enrolling city employees in the local governmental employees retirement system. It was about that, and instead of calling it the fireman's pension fund, it's now fire department. So, and you know, some of these things don't seem like a big deal, but one of the things that we are kind of proud of is that, you know, in the education system, they have janitors and maids. And a maid does not make as much money as a janitor. So we just had them totally eliminate maids and say, why can't they all just be janitors? And they're like, oh, well, that makes sense. But that's just, you know, that's the kind of thing that is really granular, but it really makes a difference. So.
And like for decades. And just, you know, they wouldn't see it 40 years ago. Wouldn't even see it 20 years ago. Yeah.
Right, exactly. All right, next up, are there any other questions?
How much do you get paid?
Yeah, not a lot. All right, so Judy is going to come up and introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Chair. That was fantastic.
Just a reminder, we are all volunteers here and we amaze ourselves every day. We get raises this year. And we're gonna double what you got this year. I am so happy that Michelle, Nora, is that how you say it? Nora Thorne agreed to be our keynote speaker today. We've known her for a long time, those of us in Buncombe County. She came and recruited us years ago carrying a bouquet of yellow flowers, and I know Robbie and I were there for lunch, and she had just passed the help with ratification of ERA in Illinois. So since that time, I have been in love with her. I love her today. We communicate often, and we're just thrilled that you're here, Michelle. She is an Illinois attorney and an advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment. Michelle has written widely on the ERA, including legislative resolutions, nationally syndicated opinion pieces, and a law journal article cited in a filing with the U.S. Supreme Court. So she's busy. She was key to the Illinois ratification of the ERA in 2020 as the 37th state, setting up Virginia to be the final state needed to ratify as required by Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Michelle is highly regarded by her peers as a constitutional scholar and an expert. Michelle, and here's where I let Michelle write her own bio, and she says, Michelle credits the ERA-NC Alliance for inspiring her and ERA advocates around the country and admires the Alliance's creativity, positivity, wisdom, and grit. Thank you, Michelle. You're so nice. I don't know how many of you have learned to do Zoom. We do Zoom a lot. And what I find is very much a confidence builder. You're sitting in your living room and you're talking to all these other people, and you may say things that you would never say before, but they're important. And we just say them, and other people hear them, and Michelle admires us. Okay, Michelle is has been instrumental in assisting the Alliance in the matters of history, background, constitutional basis. So for many of the efforts we have done, she has been a help. She is the epitome of professionalism, and I consider her a very close friend who rarely tells me no to a request. And I love that about people. Michelle is a member of the ERA Committee of the American Bar Association. In August of this year, and this is a big deal, people. In August of this year, the ABA affirmed that the Equal Rights Amendment is the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution. We invited Michelle to speak with us today about the ABA's ERA report and resolution and what comes next, and anything we've inspired her to say by our hard work this year. Michelle?
Thank you for inviting me here today. I am so happy to share this time with you. And I'm so happy to take care of the assignment I was given, and put a kind of introduction, by the way. But the assignment I was given was to talk about what happened at the ABA this summer. This summer, the ABA House delegates passed a resolution by a nearly unanimous voice vote, I might add, essentially, as Jimmy says, affirming that the Equal Rights Amendment is our 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution. I'm sorry, what's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I will do that. I'm sorry. You know, the American Bar Association has 400,000 members. It's the largest voluntary professional association in the world. It's the voice of the American legal community. So that was a really powerful message to hear. I am not the voice of the ABA here. My comments are my, but what the American Bar Association really cares about is the rule of law. They even have a rule of law initiative because it's so important to them and to attorneys generally. What does the rule of law mean? The rule of law means that we're not ruled by kings and queens and tyrants, we're ruled by the law. That's our governmental structure, and our highest law, of course, is the US Constitution. The rule of law also means that the law is applied evenly and fairly. And that's the underpinning of the Equal Rights Amendment, right? Fair rules for everyone, regardless of sex. And another important principle of rule of law is that the law be known. The late Justice Antonin Scalia liked to talk about the infamous Roman Emperor Caligula, and how Caligula would erect these tall columns, and on the very tippy top, in small print, would post the laws. We have a worse situation with the ERA. We have an amendment that has satisfied the strict requirements of the Constitution to be our 28th Amendment, yet the national government that has the responsibility, not only under federal law, but under the US Constitution, to publish it and make it known, has failed to do its job. So we don't even have the ERA up on a column in small print. And why does it matter that the ERA hasn't been published? Technically, I would argue the ERA is already part of the Constitution. I think you would say that as well, but it hasn't been published, which is unfortunate. It's really unfortunate because publication, that official recognition, is the catalyst that prompts enforcement by the executive branch, that tells the legislative branch, we have an anchor for you to pass laws, because Congress only has the powers provided for it in the Constitution. Our Constitution gives the national government powers, but it also limits them. So if Congress wants to pass a law, it has to find an anchor in the Constitution. And as we know, without this official recognition, the courts will not take the ERA into account. They adjudicate cases of government-based sex discrimination. That's a big problem. And the public doesn't know what the law is. You know, we know that. We know this is a thing, but the public doesn't. And that's really the work we have ahead, is that the public doesn't know this is a thing. I mean, imagine, you know, driving and not knowing what the speed limit was anywhere, not in your app, not in the signs. That's the situation with the ERA, and that's terrible. But the great news is that the American Bar Association weighed in because they care about the rule of law. And what are the two arguments against recognizing the ERA as part of the Constitution? Some people say that the ERA expired. There was a deadline that Congress put on it, it passed, so sad, too bad. And then they say, well, even if there's not an enforceable deadline, you needed 38 states to ratify, and about half a dozen of those state legislatures, after the fact, after political changes, said, well, we're gonna undo that, we're gonna rescind it. Well, the Bar Association weighed in and said, no, there's no enforceable time limit on the ERA, and ratifications cannot be rescinded. And then they said, governments start implementing. And what I've heard from all of you is what you've done on the state level is you've tried to have some of that done through your own statutes. And that's amazing. We need more people doing what the ERA and Sea Alliance has done, which is go through their statutes and take this seriously. It is law, and treat it as law. And that's, you know, part of what we need to do. I'm going to talk about the process. Jimmy gave me 20 minutes, and it's probably a good thing, because otherwise you'd be here for hours, and you'd be like my teenager who was like, I said just a couple minutes, we're done with this. Let me out of the car, stop talking about the ERA. She wants it passed, but in part so I stopped talking about it. I'll be honest about that. I shouldn't say she wants it passed. It is passed. She wants it published. So I started talking about it. So I'm just going to go over this in a abbreviated fashion. You're a sophisticated audience. You know this amendment, and you know the legal issues. So what I'm telling you, in great part, you already know. But what we all need to do is we need to practice this. We need to practice telling the ERA story, because we need to be the vehicles to get this message out to the public. So even if I'm going to talk and you'll say, I know that, this is an exercise. I'm going to do it. It's good for me, but it's good for you, and we need to practice this. So we know why the ERA is already part of the Constitution, because the Constitution has a provision that talks about how it's amended, right? Any ongoing good agreement, contract, social contract, the Constitution has this provision in it. There are 2 steps. They're high bars. There's a proposal step and there's a ratification step. And the ERA has met both. In the proposal step, of course, both houses of Congress as of 1972, well in excess of the 2/3 threshold, I think it was over 90% in each chamber, voted to propose the ERA. That's what Congress does. It proposes an amendment. If someone proposes marriage to you, you aren't married already. The real decision maker is the person who says, I accept, right? And the real decision maker are the states. This is a really important message of the law here. The states are very important to this. And what they do is they ratify an amendment. And ratification is a very old term that was around before the Constitution, and the person who ratifies is the principal, and they ratify an act of their agent. So think about that in this context. When some people interpret Article 5 to have this huge role for Congress, that is not how the law is. That's absurd. But the second step is ratification by the states. And of course, we know what happened, 1972 to 1977, 35 of the 38 needed states ratified, and then between 2017 and 2020, 3 more. 35 plus 3 equals 38, 38 of 50 is 3/4 of the states. The ERA is done. Ratification is the final step. And we can refer people to Article 5, because when you're looking at the law, the first thing you look at is the text of the law. And that's the kind of analysis that was done at the American Bar Association. Look at the actual text of the law. And another thing I want to point out here in this slide is the ratification time period. It was from 72 to 2020. 48 years, does seem like an awfully long time, about 50 years, right, for ratification. But think about the first step. Nobody talks about how long the proposal step took. We know that the first time an ERA was introduced into Congress was in 1923, 101 years ago. That step took about 50 years too, didn't it? It's the whole process. The founders knew that it would take a long time. So just looking at the discrete second step, that's ridiculous. Think about other human rights amendments that we've had. Getting rid of slavery, that was discussed before we had the Constitution, and it, of course, took a civil war. Women's suffrage, how long did that take? So think about some of those amendments. And the crux of the legal issue is in the language that was put in the Congressional Joint Resolution, of course, when the ERA was proposed by Congress. There's some in law that is commonly referred to as a 4 corners rule. That means if you want it in the document, you put it in the 4 corners. The document here is the text of the amendment, right? Not the internal resolution that Congress is using to vote on it. Very important point. States ratify the amendment. The amendment is what gets added and changes the Constitution, not the internal congressional resolution. Some people call that a preamble. It's not a preamble. It's an internal congressional resolution. It doesn't get glued to the amendment. And as I say, there is no time limit in Article 5, and there's no authority for Congress unilaterally through their own resolution that the states aren't technically agreeing to limit the time for states to ratify. And not only that, look at the language that they used in the joint resolution. They knew they didn't have this power because the language they used was that the amendment shall be valid when ratified within 7 years. Well, what if the amendment was ratified after 7 years? It's still valid. This is aspirational. This is a goal. At best, it's a time frame. It's not a deadline. It's not a time limit. There are plenty of lawyers in Congress, I'm sure there were at that time. They would have known that if you want to amend, make a big change to the Constitution, you got to put it in the text of the amendment. They would have known that this language is not a definite time limit. Article 5. I'd love to go through this, but I'm sure we don't have enough. I'm going to keep track of my time, so maybe give me a heads up. I love going through this word for word because this is what answers our questions. you will see there is no time limit on either step in Article 5. This is the part of the Constitution that talks about amending. This is the governing law. And not only that, it talks about ratification. It doesn't talk about undoing ratification. And ratification, you know, it's an old term in the law. We have, you know, old texts that say you can't revoke it. And we have a constitutional history that says you can't take it back. It's a stamp of approval, it's an authorization and adoption by the states. I also want to talk about the importance of this provision to the Constitution. When our Constitution was put together in the 1780s, we had 13 countries that were joined together in firm legal friendship. And of course, one of those countries was North Carolina. And what they were being asked to do is to give up some of their sovereignty to join into a new country. So kind of go from the EU to then a massive EU country, essentially. And of course, what was done in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 was that these folks, these drafters, drafted a document behind closed doors. And then they shipped it out to the states in fall of 1787, and they said, hey, this is one size fits all. Oh, you want amendments? Well, you can't get them right now. You ratify, you sign the document, and we promise you can make changes later. And this is the promise. This is probably, or arguably, the most important provision of our Constitution. Without it, the states would not have joined in to this United States as we know it under this Constitution. There's no question, you know, that it can give you volumes of history on that in quotes. The ability to amend was so important. And how do we know that? Well, gosh, you know what? We can look at the notes of the ratification conventions. And James Madison had said, when you're talking about interpreting the Constitution, and again, this assumes ambiguity, by the way, which I would say there's no ambiguity in Article 5, but if you're trying to interpret the Constitution, don't look at what the drafter said, like the Federalist Papers, for example, which, quite frankly, only were part of the New York decision, and apparently didn't even go beyond a certain area of New York. And we always talk about the Federalist Papers. Well, that was a document prepared by the Federalists, the national government lovers, right? The people who drafted the Constitution. And there's another legal rule which says if there's an interpretation question, it's against the drafter of the document. Nobody talks about that. And James Madison was right when he said, if you want to know about interpreting the Constitution, look at the ratification conventions, because they're the ones who accepted. Who are the ratification conventions? Those are the state delegates at each level who made the decision on whether to ratify. And North Carolina is fascinating, because what North Carolina did at the first convention that they held in summer of 1788 in Hillsborough is they said, you know what? We do not like this Constitution as it's written. We don't like this idea of one size fits all. And we're not sure that we believe that we're actually going to be able to amend the Constitution. And they also knew that if they did ratify the US Constitution, there are no takebacks, there are no rescissions, right? And they also said in their discussions that, well, no problem, because we can always ratify it later. And think of that. So essentially what North Carolina did is they voted to not ratify at their first convention. A stunning, stunning move. And they were not part of the United States for a period of time. They had to send an ambassador to the first Congress. And think of what and why did they do that? Because one of the reasons was they wanted a Bill of Rights. There were a lot of states that said that. A lot of states had a Bill of Rights in their constitutions protecting the individuals. And North Carolina made the bold move to say, we're not in yet. And and part of their discussion were things, the discussions have been amazing if you read through it, but freedom of religion, there's a long discussion at the Hillsborough Convention. Well, what if there's a dominant group? Then are they going to subjugate the other people? And think about also the Bill of Rights. Okay, I told you a lot of states have at the state level. It was really important for these North Carolina delegates, not only to have it at the state level, but the national level. Think of it, very important to have human rights and political rights at the national level, so that your rights don't vary as you go from state to state. Does that sound familiar? And that's what the Hillsborough Convention did for us. You know, North Carolina was one of the more populous states, in the middle of states that had ratified. There were only two states left that, you know, when the government began, it had ratified. North Carolina on principle, and Rhode Island, which some historians call Rogue Island, because they never played well with others, is my understanding. They didn't show up at meetings, they didn't want to be a part of things. They probably, in part, prompted this constitution, because the other arrangements weren't working, because Rhode Island was screwed it up, quite frankly, because they didn't play well. But anyway, that's my general take on what I've read. But you know, we got a Bill of Rights in fall of 1789, and then shortly thereafter, wow, look, there's a new convention in North Carolina, and they ratified the Constitution because they understood that we could, you know, amend the Constitution. Powerful story you have here, you know? Oh, did I just do that? Let's see. Okay, well, this is where we are. I'm not gonna go through this, I know our time is tight, but when we looked through the Constitution, when we looked through, I'm sorry, yes?
Can you go back to that?
Oh, sure,
It was
sure,
on the
sure.
wrong one while you were talking, and I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so when we reviewed the legal issues relating to the ERA, we didn't just look at the text, we didn't just look at the sort of the drafting and acceptance history, but we looked at the constitutional history and the case law. And we don't have time for me to go through all of these things, or most of them, but I'll tell you that the arguments against on the basis of constitutional history are very poor. And the arguments for recognizing the ERA as our 28th Amendment are incredibly strong. You all know about the 27th Amendment, right? That's the most recent amendment to be officially recognized as part of the Constitution. And you all know that the 27th Amendment was part of the document that included the Bill of Rights. Those were the first 12 amendments that were sent out in 1789. 2 of them weren't fully ratified. So the 10 Bill of Rights, you know, were put in place. This was one of them, the Congressional Pay Amendment, or the Madison Amendment, because James Madison drafted it. So of course, the ratification period for the 27th Amendment was from 1789 to 1992, over 200 years. Is there a time limit on ratifications? I don't think so. And the other story that the 27th Amendment tells us is because it was added in 1992, that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because I think one thing that ERA advocates need to do more of is to explain 1982. Because the common thinking is, well, the ERA, either they think the ERA is in the Constitution, or, oh, the ERA died in 1982. Well, it wasn't necessarily based on the law. I will say it is not based on the law, but it was based on custom, because prior to that time, all amendments that have been added to the Constitution have been ratified in 40 years or less. So think about that. This was a dramatic change, and that changes the whole game. And of course, when the 27th Amendment was added by the Bush administration, they said, well, it's met the strict requirements of the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't have a time limit, so it's our 27th Amendment. So there you go, right? And here we are talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. I mean, it's so fun to advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment, because the arguments against the Equal Rights Amendment are, I want the law to be unfair. I mean, it's like a lawyer's dream to advocate for the ERA, right? It's a rule of fairness. It's an arena in which fairness can be decided based on legal principles. But another thing to mention is section 3 of, this is the text of the ERA. This amendment shall take effect 2 years after the date of ratification. Well, gosh, that's a time frame that changes Article 5. Because normally under Article 5, an amendment goes into effect right away. Gosh, it was important when this was drafted to have that 2-year lag to correct the laws on the books. Wow, isn't it funny? They put that in the text of the amendment. That's where you put something where you want to change the Constitution, including its procedural and amendment provision. There's going to be a Supreme Court case. We know that, right? All modern amendments that have any teeth, they get litigated. Admittedly, the 27th Amendment, I don't think there was any litigation because it's a stupid amendment. Okay? Congress could have passed that rule within its own chambers itself. It just says, if we change our pay, which means give a pay raise, then it doesn't go into effect until after the next election. I understand it's a check on our representatives, but Congress could have done that themselves, right? We need to educate the public. We need to get a lot of people talking about this. I think there's a role for historians and attorneys and advocates. We also need to be able to talk to people who otherwise might not agree with us on political matters. There's a sweet spot now. We saw that in the last elections. There were people who supported a candidate who's thought not to be overly enthusiastic about something like the ERA, but those same voters supported candidates or referenda that spoke to women's rights or the rights of folks in the LGBTQ+ community, both of whom I think would benefit from the ERA. Of course, by the way, the ERA is for everyone, right? Woman is not in that amendment. Men can use that amendment as well. It's for fairness. And just in conclusion, because I've probably exceeded my time, there is no time limit on human rights. This is a picture, I assume it's of the FBI, I'm not sure. It looks maybe more like local state authorities, could be in North Carolina. But you have another story about the Bill of Rights. The Bill of, your document that was sent to you in, I assume, 1789 for ratification was stolen in the Civil War. It was gone for 138 years and then recovered, I guess, in 2003. A dramatic story and an important symbol, right, to have that document, because you guys really, in North Carolina, as I say, were very much behind the Bill of Rights. And you got this back, you got this symbol back, but for a while you didn't have it. We have the reverse situation, where symbolically, we know that the ERA is our 20th Amendment, but it hasn't been implemented. The Bill of Rights was implemented, but we have a reverse situation. And I just want to say I am in awe of all that the ERA-NC Alliance does. You are my friends, you are my role models, you are my heroes. You're just an amazing group. And given what you all do, and given the history of North Carolina with the Bill of Rights, it occurred to me as I was driving here looking at license plates on cars ahead of me, that instead of being called the first in flight, you should be called the first in rights. Thank you very much.
So I hope that you can answer all the questions you stirred up. So I'll just let you call on those questions.
Oh, that's very nice, and again, I haven't been keeping track of time, and I don't want to encroach or whatever, so let me know. Yes.
Hi, you said that the bill was ratified, the amendment was ratified, but not implemented.
but who also said that it is in the Constitution. So what's the difference?
Good point. It is in the Constitution, so someone at this point could file a lawsuit on the basis of that. The problem is, because it's in effect, according to me and to prominent legal scholars, once an amendment is ratified, it's part of the Constitution. There was a case, I think it was Lesser v. Garnett, regarding the women's suffrage amendment. And it said, and a prohibition, too. Once it satisfies the Constitution, it's in. But we saw that there's a time lag in terms of its legal effect. So under its own provisions, it went into effect January 27th of 2022. And wouldn't it have been nice in early 2022 to have official recognition of this amendment? Yes, it would. Right? Yes, it would. Would it have made a difference in a Supreme Court case that took place in that year? I don't know. I don't want to make smart alecky comments about the Supreme Court. I don't know. But it should have. It should have. Okay. To your point, another issue about publication is that, or benefit of it, is that under the federal laws, publication serves as evidence of the law. So even if we could file a case on the basis of the ERA, we'd have to kind of prove up the law first. So there'd be an extra burden, if that makes sense.
So it could be filed or not. The judge could decide to use it or not.
You might have first the argument of it being a law. Right. It's kind of a weird, I don't know if I answered that, but roundabout situation. Yes.
I've already heard today a lot of people asking this on behalf of everybody. So why hasn't Joe Biden done this?
Yeah, right. I mean,
Just an easy little question.
all of you asked the questions right. Yeah, why hasn't President Biden done this? And it is the question, isn't it? And probably you could hear a lot of great guesses from other people here as well. Very frustrating. I mean, he was elected in part on women's rights. Yes. And I would say before his bottom hit the chair in the Oval Office, he should have gotten this done. Of course, it was stopped by the Trump administration, the Department of Justice in early 2020, in anticipation of Virginia's ratification, the final ratification needed, issued a legal opinion. It is highly erroneous. It is missing a lot of the history, the basic history. I don't even know if it talks about the 27th Amendment. That's how empty it is. Okay? And if it doesn't, it's in a, I don't call it cursory fashion. It's erroneous. Hasn't been replaced by Merrick Garland. And Joe Biden, I don't know why he hasn't done it. He says Congress needs to act. Now, I will give him this, and there are a lot of lawyers who will tell you Congress needs to act. I would say Congress needs to act maybe for strategic reasons, but not for legal reasons. It's already part of the Constitution. It sure as heck would help us if Congress affirmed. That's what they did with the 27th Amendment, of course. We know this, it was published after the fact. Congress probably embarrassed because it had to do with the congressional pocketbook. At first said, what, and then they said, okay, we affirm, right? I mean, so we could have a situation like that. Why hasn't he done it? He says Congress needs to act. They don't have to act, but maybe for purposes of coverage for him or a Supreme Court case, it would certainly be beneficial for Congress to act. A lot of people think it might be religion. So think about that. Bill of Rights discussion in North Carolina, right? Possibly, there are people who can, I don't know yet biographies of all these folks, but, it's not heard of covered.
Sorry.
The last one, but.
So who is our leader when it comes, no movement, no cause, no organization can function well without a mouthpiece, without a voice. So is there a single person in Congress or at the state level who, I know Natasha Marcus is my shero. Like, she's done so much, and she's, you know, the insurance commissioner now. But like, who is our person who is most
Able to,
supportive of
good
this?
question, who's able to articulate?
Yes.
Kirsten Gillibrand in New York has been very articulate. We would hope, Vice President Kamala Harris would step up on this. There are, you know, Lisa Murkowski, Tammy Baldwin, we've had some great voices on this. Folks in the House as well. We have an ERA caucus, Presley and Bush, 5th largest caucus in Congress. So we do have some people, but maybe it's, I don't know, maybe not important enough for Congress to get work on.
A quick question, can you give us a title perhaps of a book that those of us who are beginners in all of the details could understand, so we have a full picture? And, you know, it could just be a junior high school reading book that we could actually get through.
Yes.
It's funny that you asked about it. Oh, Lori says she has a book.
It's called Gender Citizenship.
Oh, yes, that would be a great book.
Professor Rebecca DeWolf, and gives you the history of not only the equal rights amendment fight, but also the fight for the suffrage. Very digestible, very good book. And by the way, it's also another part book.
Gender Citizenship by Rebecca DeWolf is an excellent, talk about the early history, and some of those same issues are at play today. So I think a book needs to be written, honestly. I think a book
Can I
needs to
ask
be
for
written.
one quick question? Sure. I don't wanna mess up time. Okay, so this question, I'm on the board of pro-choice MC. So in addition to working with the alliances, I've worked with the Alliance Forever and Ever. I'm also a very strong advocate for reproductive rights. Texas was one of the first states to have an actual equal rights amendment, and yet Texas has one of the most draconian laws. To your knowledge, has anyone filed a lawsuit to basically say the ERA in Texas should have prohibited this forced coercion of women without doing anything?
You know, Lori asked, was there any case in Texas enforcing their state ERAs? I don't know, but that, I don't follow all that as carefully as I should, so that doesn't necessarily mean much. You know, we certainly had some interesting decisions in Pennsylvania based on a state ERA saying, basically undoing, or speaking against the decision that, the Dobbs decision that came out in 2022 and reasoning it correctly. We had decisions from, New Mexico and Connecticut from decades ago that said, hey, you know, when you're talking about poor women and they have medically necessary reproductive health needs, you can't use a different definition of medically necessary for them when you're talking about Medicaid than you use for everybody else. That's a violation of our state ERAs. You know, and it speaks to the Hyde Amendment, right, which talks about federal money, so we can go on that. So it's being done, you know, we have new ERAs that have been added, sorry, Jimmy, but yeah, I don't know about Texas.
Thank you all. Great questions. We have lots of primers. We have Equal Means Equal, a film, and then Legalize Equality. We also have a new film that's called Ratify that will catch up everybody on the Virginia ratification. So we can get you up and running. You won't need Michelle to run, you know, come live in your house. She's great. And Michelle, thank you so much. We have small portals, but we can't open it because Diana doesn't have one.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. All very good questions, and thank you, because you are American. You either think it's passed already or you want more information. Thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, it is my delight to tell you that League of Women Voters is such an important league organization in the Alliance, and we appreciate their support and leadership of the USA President of the League of Women Voters, Diana Wynn. We are so fortunate to have you with us today. Who all are leaguers in here? Woo-hoo! Okay, we got a bunch. Diana Wynn was elected President of the League of Women Voters of the United States in 2024. That's this year. Diana was originally elected to the League of Women Voters U.S. Board in 2022. North Carolina women do things. They do. They get up and they get elected to things. Prior to joining the League of Women Voters U.S. Board, Diana was president of the League of Women Voters of Wake County in Raleigh, and some of you are in the same chapter. Yay. She is past president of the ACLU of North Carolina, and she served on that board for several years. They're one of our newer leading organizations. Diana has over 35 years of experience delivering training to businesses, government agencies, nonprofits, and adult learners, providing training in essential communication skills. She also told me that drinking before you speak is probably not the best idea, so I'm saving my mimosa. Diana also had almost a decade of experience as a trial consultant working with attorney clients in judicial nationwide. Is that like bull?
That is a misunderstanding of the word.
We need to hear more. She was a full-time faculty member at several colleges and taught courses at the University of Maryland and the University of District of Columbia. She is the co-author of several college textbooks, including Working in Groups, Think Communications, The Challenge of Communicating, Working in Groups. Diana has an MS in Communications with a minor in Political Science, yay, and a BA in Speech Communications and an AA in Administration of Justice. She's a life member of the National Communication Association. In 2019, UNC Chapel Hill Center for the Study of the American South included Diana in their oral histories of notable women in North Carolina. Quite an honor. Congratulations. Born in Arizona and raised in Texas and California, Diana currently lives in Cary, North Carolina. And I would ask you to please help me welcome Diana.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for that very nice introduction. When I was in college, it's quite some time ago, I had a little paperback book that covered facts and myths of the Equal Rights Amendment. And I referred to it so often, it eventually literally fell apart. And as a teenager, the ERA was the first political issue I ever personally got excited about. And I have to tell you, that teenage girl never imagined that well into the 21st century, that she would be speaking before an organization that remains dedicated to the inclusion of the Equal Rights Amendment. So it really is an honor for me to be here with you today. Also proud that the League of Women Voters is a longtime supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment, though that admittedly was not always the case, I think, as many of you know. And some people ask me, why wasn't the League of Women Voters an early supporter of the ERA when it was first introduced? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but the primary one was that the early leaders thought that the ERA might jeopardize other legislation that they were working on at the time that would specifically protect women. Now, I think they were wrong. And fortunately, the League of Women Voters shifted its position in 1954. And we have supported the Equal Rights Amendment since that time. Today, and for the last number of years, and during, the height of the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment, the League has made it a priority issue. It is literally a priority issue that our members have voted on, along with voting rights related issues. I was just on a meeting Wednesday with our state leaders from across the nation, and our staff and our board members. And part of that meeting was specifically to talk to our chief counsel about what they are doing about the ERA. And number one is pressuring the Biden administration to publish the ERA. So we're just sending out action alerts. And I hope some of you have done that either for the league or for other organizations. And those, those letters are going directly to the White House and to the Vice President. So it's really important we keep that pressure up. And I would suggest to you, if you've already sent one, send another, right? Send another. But today, I'm not really here to talk about the ERA specifically. I think that you've heard a lot of really great information about where we are in the ERA, how we got there. I'm talking about women's engagement and democracy more broadly. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of the suffrage movement for a couple of reasons. One, that suffrage movement helped secure our voting rights so we could engage more fully in democracy, and because our foremothers displayed what I call radical hope, something that we are going to need going forward, and I'll talk about more in a few minutes. I am then going to discuss women's participation in our elections, including this most recent election. Now, the first Women's Rights Convention in the United States was held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. And I think many of you are aware of that. However, it wasn't until the 1890s that there was really an effort in North Carolina to secure voting rights for women. And in 1897, a bill was introduced in the North Carolina legislature for a state constitutional amendment to recognize women's voting rights. So that was early progress. However, that bill was promptly referred to the Committee on Insane Asylums, where, of course, it died. Now, I believe that the men of our 19th century legislature were making a very clear statement about what they thought about women's voting. But isn't this how women's demands for equal rights is often met by people in power with derision, ridicule, and dismissiveness? Unfortunately, the fight for women's suffrage did not go well in North Carolina. The North Carolina legislature did not ratify the 19th Amendment in 1920. Nevertheless, of course, it did become law. By the way, the North Carolina legislature did eventually ratify the 19th Amendment, but not until 1971, over 50 years later. And I would suggest that our state legislature's failure to now ratify the ERA is also a failure to learn from its past mistakes when it comes to women's rights. So what motivated the women of the 19th and early 20th century to persist in their fight for voting rights in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges for 72 years? I believe they possessed what psychologists call radical hope. And I believe that radical hope also inspired suffragist Alice Paul to begin the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923. Now, it's important to know, well, I talked about the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment primarily benefited white women at the time, right? It's mostly white women that had that benefit. It was not until the 1965 Voting Rights Act was passed that voting rights were protected more fully for people of color. And radical hope also propelled the women and the men of the civil rights movement. Now, I've referred to this notion of radical hope a couple times, and you may be wondering exactly what I mean by the notion of radical hope. Psychologists and philosophers, in particular, scholars of color, have explored this notion in more depth. Radical hope is not mere optimism and wishful thinking, because that kind of hope requires no action at all. Radical hope, rather, is a deeply held belief that our world can be better, but it is coupled with a commitment and the courage to engage in collective action. Now, I'm going to revisit this notion of radical hope in just a few more minutes, but first, I'd like to talk about women's engagement in elections, including in this past election. Now, let's go back to 1920 first. In the 1920 presidential election, when Warren G. Harding was elected, voter turnout among women was 35 to 45%, compared to men's turnout in that election, which was about 68%. Now that sounds like really low turnout on the part of women. However, given that women, and remember at the time it was mostly white women, had just gained the right to vote less than 10 weeks earlier, 69 days before election day, I don't think this was a very poor turnout on the part of women, right? Now, but since then, our voting rates have significantly improved, and women in the U.S. have long voted at higher rates than men. Nationally, more women than men are registered to vote. The number of women registered to vote typically exceeds men by about 10 million voters. About 10 million voters. And I would expect to see something similar when we get all the data in from this election. Now, since 1980, in presidential elections, the proportion of eligible women turning out to vote has exceeded the proportion of eligible men turning out to vote since 1980, and that's in terms of proportion. But, as you can see in this chart, the number of women voters has exceeded the number of men voting in every presidential election since 1964. Since 1964. Now, I don't have final numbers, of course, for this year's election, but exit polling suggests that approximately 53% were women voters and 44% were men voters. So women are showing up to vote. But I must point out that women are not necessarily a monolithic voting bloc, right? After all, it was a woman, Phyllis Schlafly, who led the fight in opposition of the Equal Rights Amendment. So in this last election, 53% of all women voters, it appears, supported Harris. But a substantial number of women, 46%, voted for Trump. So again, not a monolithic voting bloc. But I will also say, women's voting patterns are much better understood when they're examined in conjunction with other demographic factors like education and race. For example, an estimated 53% of white women voted for Trump, compared to 46% of white women supporting Harris. Compare that to Black women's voting patterns, where 89% of Black women voters supported Harris this election. Now let's look at women's voting rates specifically here in North Carolina. In 2020, women accounted for 56% of all voters in North Carolina. Now, I don't have final numbers for North Carolina this election, but I have some initial data based on exit polling. And exit polls suggest that in North Carolina this year, 55% of voters were women, compared to men being 44% of voters in the North Carolina election this year. So how does that compare to other states? North Carolina ranks somewhere in the middle third of states as it relates to women voter turnout. So that means there's a lot more potential for turning out women to vote in this state. Remember, we're middle third. We should be moving up higher in the rankings. Now, the league is really proud of all the work that we did across the nation to get out the vote. And our state league president, Jennifer Rubin, unfortunately was unable to be here today, but she wanted me to share with you some of the efforts from the League of Women Voters of North Carolina and the local leagues from across the state. Through in-person events like candidate forums, they reached in person almost 6,000 voters. They left door hangers and sent postcards to over 18,000 voters. And they reached over 300,000 voters in North Carolina through phone and text banking. I will tell you, their outreach efforts, the data on it, is going to dramatically increase when we have the data back from our vote411.org platform, which I happen to know we are breaking records across the nation in terms of our engagement on online engagement on that particular platform. I would also remind you that the League of Women Voters does all of that work here in North Carolina with an all grassroots volunteer labor force. Now, I talked a little bit about women's voting rates, but despite women's tendency to outpace men in voting, North Carolina women remain underrepresented in elected office. Women are 51% of North Carolina's population. We are over half of our population. And elected office holders, they just don't reflect women's proportion of our population. At the federal level, you all know we've yet to have a woman president. We currently have no women senators representing North Carolina. We've only ever had 2 in our entire state history. And only 5 of our 14 congressional districts are currently represented by women. I think that we're dropping to only 4 as a result of this election. 4 out of 14. And at the state level, of course, we're going to have a male governor. We've only ever had 1 woman governor in North Carolina to date. Only 16 out of 50 of our state Senate seats are held by women in our state legislature. Now, with this current election, it looks like we may have gained 1 more seat. And only 35 out of 120, and I'm going to say that again, only 35 out of 120 of our state House seats are occupied by women. And with this current election, it looks like we only gained 1 more seat. And at the county level, the majority of North Carolina counties have either none or just 1 or 2 women who are serving as county commissioners. Now, as you can see from this chart, women's representation in the North Carolina State Legislature has slowly improved since 1975. That's the good news. However, at our current rate, I just hate telling you all, because I hate seeing this statistic. At our current rate, women will not reach parity with men in the state legislature until 2084. That is 60 years from now. And that is just not soon enough. Now, I'm not saying that the men in office aren't doing a good job. You all can be the judge of that. The reality is that fewer women than men actually run for office across the nation and in North Carolina. Typically, women candidates are outnumbered 3 to 1 in our elections. So outnumbered 3 to 1. So why don't women run as often than men? I will tell you, we could spend the whole day talking about why more women don't run for office. There are lots of reasons, and some of them are very complex. I'm just going to highlight a few. Child care and elder care responsibilities that tend to disproportionately fall to women. That means they have less time to run for office and less time to hold office. Less personal wealth, right? Women don't tend to have the same level of wealth as men. So what does that mean? Less money to fund their own campaign, but I will say the research also suggests that when women run, they are good fundraisers. So it's not like they can't get the money to run. But if a woman wants to or needs to contribute significantly to the income of her household, elected office is not going to seem as appealing because most offices don't pay that well, right? Women are 40% less likely to be encouraged to actually run. They're 40% less likely to even be encouraged to run. And again, there are all sorts of reasons more women don't run. But I will say that the primary reason that the research reveals appears to be self-perception. Self-perception. Now, I don't think it will come as a surprise to all of us here in the room. And apologies to my husband, who is also here in the room. Well, not really, I'm not really apologizing. Men are more likely to see themselves as qualified to hold office, right? And we know that that's the case in the private sector too. Incompetent men view themselves as qualified to hold just about any
Amen.
political office. I'm not going to go into any. Women are half as likely to see themselves holding office. However, when women run in North Carolina, they tend to win. They tend to win. Now, I don't have data yet for this election, but let's look at the 2020 election when we had a lot of women running. In 2020, specifically in North Carolina elections, women accounted for roughly 1/3 of the candidates. So far fewer than half, only about 1/3. For those who had to run in a primary election, almost half of those women won their primary election, even though they only accounted for 1/3 of the candidates. And for all those that ran in a general election, almost 65% of the women on the ballot won their race, again, having only been 1/3 of the candidates. So women can run for office, they can fundraise to, fund that campaign, and they can win. But we need to encourage more women to run for office, and quite frankly, we need to send girls and women the message that they are qualified to hold those positions. So that's really good news if women run. But we had an election last week, and we had a woman at the top of the ticket. And I know many of you are very disappointed with the outcome. So this may not feel very encouraging to you in this moment, especially because we will have a new president in January whose campaign, quite frankly, was tinged with racism and sexism throughout the election season. I do not underestimate the challenges that we are going to face as we move ahead. So the fight ahead of us will require radical hope. So I'm going to turn to that subject again and share with you exactly what I mean about it. Fortunately, psychologists provide us with a framework for moving forward with radical hope by doing the following. Understand our history of injustice, but importantly, be aware of the acts of resistance that were taken. It's important that we learn from our past as we continue to move forward, so we don't lose sight of our history. And as you all know, it's been a long history, the fight for women's rights. Recognize and be proud of those who came before us in this work. You know, we are not the first activists to do this work, right? And we must not lose sight of what we and those who came before us have in fact achieved. We also need to embrace a collective vision of the future. Now, I think that those of us here in this room, we do share a collective vision, a vision of an equitable world for everyone, including women. So when we are faced with hostility and derision and dismissiveness, like women have faced whenever we have fought for our rights, we take strength from the fact that a vision for a better world is shared by so many others. Finally, and most importantly, radical hope fuels and is fueled by collective action. Action is what sets radical hope apart from simple hope. And I want to be clear about this. Radical hope is not necessarily radical action, okay? Radical hope is not necessarily radical action, but radical hope drives activism in all its forms, both large and small. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace published an article earlier this year titled, "On the Front Lines, Women's Mobilization for Democracy in an Era of Backsliding." And the article observes that there has been an erosion in old and new democracies in every region of the world, including in the United States. And I think that you all are aware of that. However, the article's analysis concludes that women have historically been at the forefront of pro-democracy movements, and that women are driving pro-democratic mobilization in the United States right now. And I take hope in the knowledge that women are going to be at the forefront in the fight ahead. Now, I would finally like to leave you with the words of author and feminist Rebecca Solnit, who says, "Hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. It is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency." So, from Seneca Falls to Selma to Stonewall, hope has always fueled activism, and hope will sustain us through our work as we continue to move ahead. I want to thank you all for having me here this afternoon. It really is a pleasure to be with you, especially at this moment. Thank you.
Field a couple of questions, and let us know a little too good for it to go on.
Right. Got a question over to the right here.
I'm wondering, with all the organizations here today, what specifically we're doing to handle guilty and thought with other white women concerning the issue? Like black and brown. This is what I'm saying. Like black and brown women have been asking us to do for longer than I've been alive. I'm not talking about anything under the elections or postponement here. What are any organizations represented here today doing anything to change the thought of other white women?
So I don't know if there's an organization that specifically and overtly articulated a mission to change the thought processes for white women. And again, no matter what we do, they're not going to be a monolithic voting bloc. I mean, women, we have seen historically, very often have voted against their own interests, including in the fight for voting rights, right? There were women who were opposed to women's suffrage. look, there's gonna be a lot of analysis about the why as it relates to the outcome of this election. So I don't have, any, insider insight, but when people are asking me, what I think drove the election, number one, racism. Number two, sexism. Number three, mis and disinformation. Mis and disinformation. Now, the league does have a specific campaign, a very specific national campaign for combating mis and disinformation. Now, that is not targeted specifically to only white women. This is a problem across our electorate. And when we talk about changing the hearts and minds of women as it relates to race, I don't think it's just women. I think our nation, disappointingly has not come as far along as we had hoped it had as it relates to both racial and gender equity. So what can we do? I think that we are all incumbent on one, checking ourselves, right? Checking ourselves. You may not be as woke as you think you are. Implicit bias is real and you need to catch that in yourselves. And I do think that you need to call it out. You need to call it out. And I know that's uncomfortable, right? We're going into Thanksgiving. I'm telling you, call it out. When you're at that table. But, I do think that we have very important principles on the line. Racial and gender equity are too important to prioritize politeness over that. Now, of course, there's time and place in, your relationships when you can do that. Call it out, and then join with like-minded organizations to do this work. And in the end, we can only bring those along with us who share our values and principles. But there are enough of us in order to make changes in this nation.
I have a question. Where are you speaking next as the USA representative?
I will be in Florida next. Before the election, I was in Georgia, I was in Florida, I was in Pennsylvania, and our fabulous CEO, Selena Stewart, she was in Michigan and Nevada and Arizona, so kind of divide and conquer some of those states, but we'll be speaking around Michigan.
I think we're a variety of communities here across the state. Here in Winston-Salem, the Ministers Conference is very active in many ways to combat racism, and not necessarily focusing on sexism, but it has elected women to be the president of the group, more than once, and there are other women serving in leadership too. So if you have that group in your communities, and the Ministers Conference is a group of Black pastors who graciously allows white people to join, and and lay people, and doing what we can in this community to combat racism.
Yeah, as you mentioned that, it brings to mind the work of Anna Julia Cooper, who was originally born in North Carolina and born into enslavement. She ended up leaving North Carolina, but she, in the 1800s, wrote what is generally recognized as the first Black feminist writing. And a lot of what she was doing was calling out the clergy about the inclusion of women. Yeah.
Having conversations like this on the study circles, I think that helps. Bring conversations together, concerns and issues, and as you said, check out.
And look, I'm not gonna lie to you, within my own circles, I've had to call out women who had no idea the implications of some of the comments that they were making. And we all learn, right? And it's okay to make mistakes, but you need to try to be as conscious of what is driving some of your assumptions. We talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, both across our nation and in institutions. I'm also going to tell you, because I look around the room and I see a lot more white women than women of color. I'm gonna tell you, the work of DEI is white women's work. White women need to step up to this work.
Tracy?
Really quick, I don't know if you have mentioned this, but in one of your slides showing percentages of women who had won races, in the North Carolina House is invisible at 39% winning. And I supported 2 women that would have turned Guilford County completely blue in the House, representing our county, and they did not win. So what can we do to increase women winning in the North Carolina House?
You know, earlier, you talked about the work with Lillian's List. And I think working with organizations that specifically work to get out the vote. I will tell you, the league often very much targets specifically women. Like when I said they did a lot of it's not a lot of postcards. A lot of times what they're doing is they're pulling down lists of women in particular from a database system of women who have voted, but they don't regularly vote. So participate with groups like the league, get advice from Lillian's List and other professionals who do the work of get out the vote. I believe in the work going forward and the fights ahead. We all need to be working in partnership because no one organization is going to preserve democracy. No single organization can do this. We really have to be aligned in one larger objective as it relates to democracy. We can all have our specific agendas, but we need to keep the eye on the big picture when we work together.
That is the last question.
This is more of a comment than a question, but yesterday, I was on a webinar sponsored by the Alice Paul Center. There were 2 young women, I say young women, they were talking about the implications of this election with the ERA. Very good part of the presentation. But there was someone on that call who typed in, what is ERA?
Yeah.
So we have a lot of work still to do to be sure that there are people that might think it's in the Constitution, there are people who don't even know what that is.
They don't know what it is. Yeah, we understand that. And that's the case when people go to the polls and they vote. We think they're voting on specific issues that these candidates have said. And for the most part, most voters aren't they're not voting because they're being driven by a particular policy, which is why I point to racism and sexism in elections that we're going to have to overcome. It's not specific policy.
Oh, I just have one comment. Maybe this is the time to get out our ERA buttons, if we still have them. Because you know what, that's not as political as a lot of things we might want to say. And it might just be there, it might spark some conversation. So maybe that's something subtle.
See us in the lobby.
Yeah. And I would just clarify, the league, of course, is strictly nonpartisan, but we are not neutral on issues. And we support the ERA and equal rights. Gender equity is not a partisan issue.
Right.
It is, we should not be afraid about going out and proclaiming that we just want gender equity.
Diane.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And one of the stars of the day is Marla Marshall, who has arranged lunch and is going to tell us all about it.
Hi, everybody. All right, lunch is served, but I just want to tell you, in the meantime, as you're getting seated again, don't ignore the little placards that are at your table. There are actions that you can take right now. You can take a picture of it if you want to do them later as well. And then we're going to deliver postcards to President Biden's office along with vote equality. So I'll put some extra ones at your table. You don't need to address them. You just say, hey, Mr. Biden, we need you to publish the ERA before you leave office or something, whatever. But no postage, anything like that. If you take cards with you though, you do need postage. So if you fill them out, just leave them here for us. So we're going to start lunch and it will start on the left and kind of go around that way. That way.
Table. I think just kind of start left to right. How about that? Are you guys ready over here on this last table?
Thank you all for being here.